welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023, week 35. That's August 28th to September 3rd. And I hope that you are as excited as I am that my car runs. But anyways, let's get into this video. We're going to start by opening up a box from Summit Racing, and we're going to start by replacing the Holley Smart coil that I blew up. So this is very quick. We're just going to unbolt the two bolts, pull the mount apart, and then we're going to install the new coil, plug it in, and that part is done. Yep, luckily I only burnt up the one coil, so replacing that was super quick and easy. With that replaced, I'm going to go and I'm going to make sure that the car battery is charged. So I'm just going to plug in the battery charger, turn it on, and we're going to get the battery charged up. While the battery is charging, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these couple of boxes down, because one of these has all of my aluminum fab stuff. So it's got a bunch of 3-inch clamps, so I can clamp the pipe to the intercooler and, you know, clamp it where I need it. Although I do need a few more clamps, so I'm gonna have to order a couple more, and I'm gonna need to just order some more clamps. Quickly put the intercooler back on, and we're gonna get some of the piping back on with clamps this time. I'm just trying to figure out how I had this intercooler. I definitely did not have it angled forward like that. I think it angles back, but I don't really remember. Maybe it angles forward. I don't remember how it goes, but this is just for, you know, fire up purposes, so it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be together. Here I am. I was struggling with the hose clamp on the throttle body end, and I just don't have a big enough hose clamp. So I'm gonna have to order a bigger one for the throttle body. I should probably do that right now, actually. Yeah, so this is actually the next evening, and so I did order that clamp. I ordered a few other clamps, and then I got distracted, and because I needed some other parts, and the company I was ordering from had those parts, I ordered a bunch of other stuff. So the rest of my evening yesterday wasn't focused on finishing off the audio for this video. It was running back and forth, you know, from my office to the shop to measure stuff and look at stuff and make sure I'm getting the right stuff. So anyways, getting the intercooler on, getting things set up, and ready to fire the car up. So the next thing that I'm going to get back to work on is this surge valve pipe. And if you remember in one of the previous videos, I welded a bit of a bead onto there. So what I'm doing is I'm just grinding that bead off, because I bought a tool that will actually allow me to roll that tube and put a bead on the end, and hopefully allow the hose clamp to grip. To get at the inside of the weld, just to smoothen that pipe out, I'm using a carbide burr. And now I'm going to play with the new tool and clean up the vise and, you know, figure out how this thing works, put it all together, and then we're going to put that bead on the pipe. Watch as I struggle to get this going. It's funny, hilarious. So I was hoping to get away with leaving the surge valve on, and when I, try and get the pipe in the tool, well, the surge valve hits the bench, so, angle it and try and rotate it, and then we're hitting the tightening handle, so that's not going to work. So okay, let's go remove that. So at least now I can get the pipe in the tool, got it tightened down, but it's kind of, you know, really tight right against the vise, and then so I had to angle it, and then my hand was hitting the drill, and it was just, everything was in the way, but, you know, I was able to get it done as much as it sucked. So I just finished deburring and grabbing some clamps, and now I'm going to put the surge valve back on. And of course there's only 5 screws on the bench where I put it, so I gotta search around and try and find the 6th. Yep, that's just typical. So I figured, screw it, I'll just throw the 5 in, and then I'll look for the 6th again after. So here I am searching around again. I do eventually find it, thankfully, so... So I'll just quickly throw this all back together. Nothing much to say. So after tightening that clamp down a little bit, I noticed that the airline is short for some reason. I had this in the surge valve before, so I'm not sure what's changed and why it's no longer long enough, but I was like, hey, I have a 90-degree fitting. Why don't I throw that on? Because that would work. And then I realized that the 90-degree fitting won't work because the there's a little rise in the middle of the surge valve, so the 90-degree can't actually thread on. So I'm just rerouting that airline into a way where I can actually plug it into the surge valve. I do need to buy more airline and just route it properly, but for right now this will do. I'm just throwing a little bit of tape on the airline to keep it away from the belt on the Pro Charger, because I don't want it to burn through. Even though I'm gonna get rid of that piece anyways, it's still, I just don't want it to burn through right now. So with that, I'm just going to take a look at the laptop, kind of make sure that things are ready to go as much as I can. You know, make sure the map sensor is working now, because that was, you know, probably the reason why I didn't fire up before. And the fact that it fired up at the start of this video means that was the reason. So yeah, so we're going to get ready to fire this thing up now. Here we go. You know, this thing cranks. It fired for a little bit, but because the tune in it's not great for cold starts, it didn't want to run yet. So my little starter button there, I kind of messed up and I shorted it to ground and it kind of killed the clamp. So I'm just going to quickly swap the end on that clamp. Now with the new end on there, put that on and let's try starting this up again. And instantly, as soon as I gave it a little bit of throttle and there was any boost, that charge pipe blew off the far side. So if you missed it, go back and watch it. You'll see as soon as it cranks up, it blows it off. But yeah, now it's running and this is just awesome. I'm so happy that it's running. It is smoking a bit, but that's just the headers. They're brand new headers. So as they get some heat in them, they're going to smoke until they burn the coating off and whatnot. But it runs and I'm just fucking ecstatic that it runs. It doesn't hurt that it sounds so good. The only thing is there's no exhaust on it, so it is pretty loud. But you know, I just checked some sensors. I checked one of my data logs just to make sure I got oil pressure and fuel pressure and all that fun stuff, and you know, everything looked great. So what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to restart the car, but because there's no coolant in it, the temperature sensor isn't quite right. So even though the engine's got a little bit of heat in it, it still thinks it's pretty cold. So it doesn't really restart. So I'm just going, you know, checking a few things, going back and forth, trying to get it to restart. Even though at this point in time, I don't really need it to restart. It ran, so I should just kind of leave it. But I didn't leave well enough alone. And also unseen here is it ended up there was some fire in the header because it was just dumping a bunch of fuel because it thinks it's colder than it is. So there ended up being a little bit of a fire in the header. So I had to quickly put that out. Luckily it wasn't a big deal, but yeah. So what I'm doing now is, this is actually like first thing in the morning. I think before I even start work. I don't remember, but it was early in the morning. I am taking the front suspension apart on both sides. And the reason why I'm doing that is I need to get the spindles off so I can get them over to the machine shop so that I can get the tie rod end drilled out to 5/8. It's a taper right now, and I am going with a different what's the part called? It's a, I'm gonna have to look this up, aren't I? It's a bump steer kit. Oh man, I paused the recording and I thought about it for another 2 minutes and I couldn't remember, and then went to look at the receipt and it popped in my head. It's my bump steer kit. So in order to install the new bump steer kit, I need to pull the spindles off to get them drilled out. So I'm just going to pull all the front suspension apart. now that I've got the spindles off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark on the spindle the size, and then I'm going to tape off all of the holes that I don't want modified, and that's just, it makes it much easier and much more clear for the machinist. Don't touch any of these other holes. This is the only hole that's getting modified, and here's the size. It's got to be 5/8. So just, you know, doing that just to make everybody's life easier. And bam, just like that, we skip forward. Those holes have now been reamed out to 5/8 if I recall correctly. Yeah. Maybe they have in this, maybe they haven't. You know, I'm not sure actually. In any case, that is my new bump steer kit from Maximum Motorsports. So this is a bolt-through design. I'm just testing to make sure that it actually threads onto the inner tie rods, because as you'll remember from a couple of videos back, when I attempted to install the bump steer kit that I got for the foxbody, it didn't thread onto the SN95 inner tie rods because they changed the threading. So this time I was just making sure. But yeah, so now I definitely have the spindles back, and I am just reinstalling the front end. So just doing the inverse of what I did to take it all off. But this time, since I'm not really planning on taking the suspension back apart again, I am torquing everything up to the appropriate specs. And here we get a very brief visit from Answer. She is such a sweet, sweet girl. And just like that, the front suspension is good. And this is tight. Like the spindle, like turning it by hand is really tight, which is really nice. It's really good to see. Alright, so the passenger side's done. We're just going to continue on and do the exact same thing on the driver's side. Now that I have the suspension installed, what I'm doing here is I'm putting some tape on the steering wheel, and I'm just going to try and center the steering rack. So I turn it all the way left until it stops, and then I turn it all the way right, count the turns until it stops, and then I turn it back the opposite direction, half the amount of turns. So while I'm doing all of this, I'm also recording this to do like an instructional video. So hopefully I get the steering all finished and I can get that video out at some point in time in the next few weeks as well, because I think it's got some decent information in it. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of lay everything out, get a nice picture, and then I'm going to start by installing the inner tie rods, the boots, and then I'll put the bump steer kit on. So as I mentioned, we are going to start with installing the inner tie rod. Very straightforward, just thread it on, taking it down with the crescent wrench a little bit. Do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to look at installing the outer tie rod, but with the spindle roughly centered. I'm just trying to figure out how this inner tie rod's going to go in, and really I don't think it's going to work all that well. I'm almost feeling like I probably should have stuck with the foxbody inner tie rods and the foxbody bump steer kit. It probably would have worked, maybe even a little bit better. But I didn't feel like I had a ton of thread on the outer tie rods, even though I actually probably had more than enough, and I really probably should have given it a good shot, even though like the inner tie rods were shot though. When I pulled them off, they were used and abused and needed to be replaced. So I mean, I made the decision. I went with the SN95 inners, and I did the new SN95 outer bump steer kits. So, you know, such is life. I made the decision. I'm going to live with it. I'll make it work. What I'm doing right here is I'm just cleaning the boots with a little bit of mineral spirits, just get some of the gunk and crap off of them. Sorry for the terrible camera angle, but I'm just threading the outer tie rods on and getting it kind of lined up with the spindle. And with it lined up, I'm just going to throw the bolt through there just to kind of hold it. So when I thread this outer tie rod on as much as it'll go and line it up with the spindle, as you can see, that spindle is not pointing any. So what I'm doing is I'm just in the car, I'm, you know, turning the steering wheel all the way left, all the way right, making sure everything's working. And as it turns out, it doesn't turn as far left or as far right with everything installed. And looking at this video now, it looks like the outer tie rod is actually making contact with the shock when it's all the way right, which is why it's not able to turn anymore. And that kind of, you know, maybe not makes sense, but it looks like that's exactly what's happening here. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go back and double check that. And once I got my actual tires for the car, I can, you know, check it with the tires on and just check the travel. I want to make sure that it's not turning too much so that the tire hits the fender or the coils and stuff like that. So there's going to be some adjustment that has to come in the future that I can't do right now. So here I'm just kind of taking a measurement of how much I'm thinking I need to cut these inner tie rods down, because that's what I'm going to do. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to refine center again. You know, just turn it all the way left, all the way, count it, and then turn it all the way right. Count it, and then, you know, try and figure out where the middle is. Now that I think about it, you know, this probably isn't right. What I'll probably end up doing is loosening off the tie rods, turn the rack all the way left, count, and then go all the way right, count, and then recenter it, and then put the make that as my center, because that would be the true center of the rack. And then I'll make sure that the tie rods are adjusted accordingly. So I've kind of guesstimated how much I want to cut these down. So I'm just going to get everything set up. I'm just going to use these soft jaws to hold the tie rods in the vise while I cut it down. And what I'm doing right now is I'm grabbing my tap and die set. Oh no, I was just grabbing a cutting disc. There's my tap and die set, because what I want to do is I want to find the size of the tie rod and the thread pitch, and I think this ends up being a 14 millimeter by 1.5. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want to put my die on the tie rod, thread it down, then cut it, because then the thread or the die will be in a position where I can take it off and chase the threads and clean up the threads as I'm taking the die off, instead of cutting it and the threads maybe not being perfect and then trying to thread the die on if it's already threaded onto the rod. After I cut it, when I unthread the die off of the rod, it'll create the threads without, any chance of misalignment. So I'm just going to mark, cut, and then pull the die off, and I'm going to do that for both tie rods. And then after, I will also go to the belt sander, and I'll put a bevel in the end of it. Like you can see, the end of this tie rod isn't perfectly straight. There's a bit of a bevel to help align the outer tie rod with the inner. So I'm just going to do the same thing there. And I'm going to do that bevel before I pull the die off. That way I make nice threads the entire way down. So with that cut, let's reassemble and reassess. Look at that. Now that the tie rod's cut down, it looks like the outer tie rod doesn't even make contact with the shock anymore. So, I think what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to drop the spindle, let them flop, recenter the rack, and then reattach the outer tie rods to the spindles. And that's okay. I'll do that later. So yeah, just reading the instructions just to figure things out. kind of hard to see in this shot, but there's a bunch of spacers on the ground, and I'm following the Maximum Motorsports instructions for a baseline. So it's going to go, I think it's bolt, spindle, a 1 1/4 inch spacer, and then the tie rod, and then a like a 380 spacer, and then the nut, I think is what it is. Yeah, so in any case, it's the nut, the big spacer, the tie rod, the short spacer, and then bolt goes through the top of the spindle. You get the long spacer, you get the tie rod end, you get the short spacer, and then you get the bolts. So, I think this is probably a fairly decent starting point. They have instructions on how to calculate the bump steer, and I will go through those at some point, but it does require a specialized tool that you got to order from them that I don't have. But for now, just as a starting point and just to kind of get this on the road for some shakedown drives, going with the base recommendation will be just fine. And with that, we have front suspension. If I bolted the rack to the car, I would actually be able to steer the car. I think that's pretty damn awesome. So now I'm just going to tighten up the wheel hub nuts with an impact. These are supposed to be up to 250 foot-pounds, but I'm just going to hit it with the impact as tight as I can for now, because I don't have, the wheels on the ground to actually get it that tight, nor do I have a torque wrench that'll go up to 250 yet. I'm not really looking forward to buying that tool. I'm kind of looking forward to it because, a new torque wrench is kind of shiny, but I'm not looking forward to it because they're not exactly cheap for a decent one. Well, now that we got the suspension working, or the steering working, I should say, we are going to do a little bit of cleanup here. Now that we've got some clean floor to lay on and that pool of gas is cleaned up, I'm going to start working on getting the rear diff kind of angled and aligned correctly. So when I first put the diff in the car, I just got it in there. I didn't care about the angle that it was at. I just wanted it in the car, the parts off the bench, and the thing in the car. Well, now as we're getting quite a bit farther into this project, I want to make sure that the diff is actually at the correct angle. So it should be 3 degrees up, the engine is 3 degrees down. I should say it should be between half a degree and 3 degrees up for the diff, and between half a degree and 3 degrees down on the engine. So that's so that the drive shaft has a little bit of tension on the U-joints, and the needle bearings in there have a little bit of tension to spin. So right now, I think I'm at something silly like I'm down 5 degrees or something like that. So I need to pull the lower control arms out. I'm going to get the lower control arms moved down into the lowest set of bolt holes, because what that's going to do is pull the bottom of the diff more towards the front of the car, and when that happens, that's going to raise the angle on the pumpkin. So I'm just going to fight with that for a bit because those bolts are in there really tight. There's a lot of tension on them, and at this point I'm not exactly sure the best way to get the lower control arms out. So what I'm going to do is pull the wheel off, and I'm going to put jack stands under various parts of the suspension. So I'll jack it up. Essentially what I'm trying to do is get it to a point where I take just a little bit of tension off of the bolt so I can slide it out. And to do that, I'm going to try and put a jack stand under the diff so that the weight of the diff is kind of on the jack stand. And then if I put the jack just on it a little tiny bit, hopefully it just removes enough tension that I can get the bolt out. So long story short, I'm just going to try and get these bolts out. as you can see, I've been working this bolt out, and we are pretty close to getting it out. So it's very quick, but what happened there is as soon as I pulled that bolt out, the lower control arm dropped, and the entire diff on this side like shot forward. You can see that the upper control arm has a lot of bind to it right now, and yeah, so what's happening is that lower control arm is stopping the diff from coming forward in the car, and there's so much force on there that, you know, once I finally got that bolt out and all that pressure was released, it just shot forward. Now at this point in time, I also have jack stands under the body still, so I wasn't too concerned like with the car falling over or anything like that, but I was, you know, making sure I was kind of out of the way. If the diff came back for some reason, I didn't want to be in the, like, you know, with my face beside the rotor and I get smacked in the face. So I just kind of did it in as safe a way as possible. And then I learned that, yeah, the diff shoots, it has a lot of forward force on it. So by using a ratchet strap, I can pull the diff back, and that's how I'm going to release the tension off of that bolt. So I'm going to do that on this side. Just get a ratchet strap around the diff, around the back cage bar, and then we're just going to tighten it up a little bit. And you'll see that once I do that, this side, the lower control arm is pretty much loose, and getting that bolt out is, you know, just, I can pull it with my hand. Like on the other side, I had to, you know, like use a pry bar and kind of pry it out, but this side, by, you know, pulling that tension off, it just came out super easy. So now I know how to get those lower control arms out if I need to. And something that I'm really gonna need to fix is, it's kind of hard to see in the video, but the bracket for the diff is bent. When this was being shipped to me, somebody along the lines hit it with a forklift and bent the hell out of this bracket. So a long time ago, I heated it up and I did my best to kind of straighten it out, but it was not good enough. It's still super tight and really just janky. So I am gonna have to get back in there, heat it all up, and make sure that that is straight again. Right, I should not have to be hitting this bolt in with a hammer. You saw how easily it came out of the third hole. I was able to just pull it out with my hand. So with no force and no tension on this, I shouldn't have to hammer it in. But because the outside bracket is so bent, it's not right. And I'm gonna have to fix this because I hate it. But in any case, we got this side done. The lower control arm is now on the lowest setting. And what's that angle looking at? The angle looks like it's 5 degrees, but I mean, or 4. But of course, that's with it at full droop. I need to measure it when it's on its wheels. So before I want to jack the rear end up anymore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw the front wheels on this car, and I'm going to get those little wheel cribs under them. The reason why is the front end is real heavy with the engine in, so I don't want to jack up the rear end way more than the front. I'd rather jack up the front end, have a little bit of weight, all the weight of the engine on the jack, and then lower it down on the front, and then I can jack up the back. I just think that jacking up the back high enough to get the wheel cribs under it might not be the safest bet, so I'm gonna go this way. to make sure I have some air in the tires, because if they're flat, well, it's not going to be all that great. So very quickly we'll throw 32 pounds in each of the tires. If you ever freshly put a tire on a hub and you don't spin it, you've done something wrong. So as we can see from that video, the car is not even close to high enough to get the wheel cribs under the wheels. So we're gonna grab the jack, we're gonna move it forward, and we're going to, first I'm gonna try and jack it up under the frame, but my jack does not lift high enough to get it up that high. My jack can't get it up. So I moved over to the front, and I'm jacking up right on the K member, and for the second time in the row, I can't get it up. So I'm just going to grab a block of scrap wood, put that between the jack and the K member, and I think that should hopefully get us high enough. And it doesn't. So I'm going to grab a second piece of scrap wood, throw that between there, and this is definitely going to be high enough, right? Yes, just high enough. Okay, so good. We can get the wheel crib under both wheels now. And let that down, and then we'll go move around to the back and pretty much do the exact same thing. We're going to jack up on the diff, get everything up, put tires on, and get it on the wheel cribs. One of the nice things about these wheel cribs is that it actually lifts the car, a couple of inches higher than I had it on the jack stands. So I'm also not worried about, when the jack stand's kicking out, like the car is essentially on the ground, but in the air, so it's kind of nice to work on stuff. So in the back, got the same problem, just can't get the rear end up enough to get on both wheel cribs. So again, grab some wood, throw it under there, and we'll try again. After I try this, which is going to fail, because that's just not going to work. Oh, actually, I lied. It is going to work right now. As you can see, I can jack it up just high enough and kind of kick the wheel crib under there. And the car is going to be flat on its wheels for the first time in, I don't know, like 3 years. This is awesome. I'm so excited. Even though it currently looks like a 4x4, like look at that, like a 6-inch gap between the wheel and the fender well. But I don't care. It's on its wheels and I can clean up under the car. This is just awesome. We're making progress. So after a little bit of cleanup, that is all the time that we are going to have for today's video. So as always, if you've stuck around this far, I would like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.